Hello, and thank you for joining the Vidalia Onion Educational Conference as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I am Timothy Coolong, and I'm a professor of horticulture at the University of Georgia, and I will be the moderator and presenter for this presentation. A couple of notes first before we begin. Pesticide CEU and CCA credits are available for most presentations offered during the live Southeast Regional Conference. Please check the Pesticide CEU guide for a list of approved presentations and participating states. The Pesticide CEU guide is located in the Event Resources tab under the Media Player. The guide is also available at the Resources Center located on the main menu of the conference platform. Please note, pesticide credits will only be available for registered attendees and only during the live conference. Credits will not be available for later on-demand viewing. To get CEU credits, there's a simple three-step process. First, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen, as shown here on the slide, and type your first name, last name, and states for which you are requesting credits. Again, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen, type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. The second step is to sign out at the end of every presentation. To sign out, simply go back to the audience chat box, put your first name, last name, and the states for which you're requesting credits. You will then be reminded to sign out at the end of the presentation. Now, the third step to complete the pesticide CEU registration. To do this, you only have to complete the registration one time during the conference. This is not required for every presentation. To access the pesticide CEU registration web link, open the Pesticide CEU guide on the Event Resources tab located under Media Player. The Pesticide CEU registration web link is located on the front cover of the guide. This presentation is pre-recorded in order to reduce technical difficulties. We will be answering your questions live, however, at the end of the presentation. You can submit a question at any point during the talk by typing your question in the questions box and pressing send. Please don't forget to thank our 2021 sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and the featured products pavilion. And lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for the coffee chats and each evening for networking. You can check the conference agenda for further details. Now, I'd like to introduce myself again, Timothy Coolong, a professor at the University of Georgia in the Department of Horticulture. Many of you listening to this may know me. Previously, I was the vegetable specialist based in Tifton, a position that Dr. Andre Da Silva has now taken over. But during that time, I did a fair amount of work with Vidalia onions, and I've continued to do organic onion work since I've moved up to Athens. My new position is focused on organic vegetable production, and in addition, as many of you may know, I've been working on hemp production for Georgia the last few years. So with that, I'd like to begin a talk on organic nitrogen management in Vidalia onion. As you can see, the picture here on my title slide is actually conventional onions, because look how exceptionally clean they are. This is from the onion farm in Reedsville. A lot of the research we will show today will feature some conventional trials from Reedsville, as well as some work conducted in Tifton and Watkinsville. So nitrogen in Vidalia onions. Nitrogen, as you know, has been well researched in conventional Vidalia onions. Sulfur has probably been the most thoroughly researched due to the impact on flavor, but nitrogen is right up there. Current recommendations range from around 120 to 150 pounds an acre of nitrogen. Although I will say that many growers over the past few years have gone to using a fair amount less than that. We've seen quality onion crops being grown with 105 to 110 pounds an acre of nitrogen. The Onion Research Farm has been running the variety trial with lower nitrogen levels the past several years. And really, what it demonstrates is that obviously that you will reach a point at which you do not have enough nitrogen to grow this crop, but it's really important to match nitrogen availability with the growth stage of the crop. So you can see in this slide the different growth stages of the onion crop, and typically, traditionally, we would put out some nitrogen fertility prior to transplant, and then an additional shot in January during the start of vegetative growth, again in late January, and then following up later in the season as the bulb is swelling with calcium nitrate. I've circled around transplant with a red circle here on this slide because I did some work before I left Tifton, and I know some growers are now experimenting with not using pre-plant nitrogen. In those first few weeks when onion transplants are just kind of sitting there in the soil, they're not growing a whole lot, although they are putting on roots. Maybe coming in with nitrogen after a couple of weeks after planting. And so I think matching the need with the needs of the plant with nitrogen application has allowed us to get down to a much lower level of nitrogen than we previously thought. So, and this makes sense. So this is some work I did over in the Reedsville area, both at the onion farm and on private farms, looking at dry matter accumulation and growth in the field. And you can see here, late in December, you start off very low. This is pounds of dry matter per acre. So, a couple hundred pounds. We actually had a freeze the year I did this. So we lost some foliar tissue. But again, up until late January, we have very little dry matter. It's essentially the transplants that you put out in the field. And it's in early February when you start seeing this very strong growth rate. And that occurs up until, in this particular season, kind of mid-April is when bulb and leaf tissue maxed out. But really, we're trying to now match our nitrogen so that it's available when the onion starts to kind of take off in terms of growth. So maybe not having a tremendous amount of nitrogen available early in December, but instead have it available kind of mid-January so that it's there when the onion needs it. And again, we saw similar types of trends. This is actually nitrogen, and this is removal. And so what we did was we took entire onion plants, harvested them out of the field, dried them down, measured the nitrogen, and calculated on a per acre basis how much nitrogen would be removed. And so early onions, this was on a private farm. These were some very early planted onions. I think they were planted very early November. So they matured in the first part of April this year. And they were heavily fertilized. But again, you see that while these onions did accumulate up to over 160 pounds an acre of nitrogen, because like I said, they were heavily fertilized, they didn't really start accumulating that even as early as they were planted until late January. Now, this main season, this was at the onion farm. These are Sapelo Sweets. And you can see here, this is more typical of the growth rate that we've seen around the region where, again, you have very little growth until the first part of February, and then it takes off. And in this case, the onions accumulated around 115 pounds of total nitrogen. That's leaves and tops. And then you see that the amount drops off in May. That's harvest. So we leave the tops in the field and we're removing the bulbs. And that bulb that we're removing, in the graph on the right side of the screen, those bulbs take away about 75, 78 pounds of nitrogen. Even on the early onions, that slide, you can see that those bulbs, there was a lot of foliage. Once that foliage was chopped off and left in the field, those bulbs removed about 80 pounds of nitrogen. So the main difference between the two is just the amount accumulated in the foliage. But again, we're trying to match nutrient removal to the growth rate of the onions. So in terms of organic onions and nitrogen, Dr. George Boyhan published a study in 2010 that showed that increasing yield up to showed that increasing onion yield up until 10 pounds or 10 tons of poultry litter per acre was shown. And so this graph is from that study there. You see a slight increase. The top line on that with the circles is total yield. And you'll see, pretty much a linear increase all the way up to 10 tons an acre of poultry litter. Now that's quite a bit. If that was a 3% nitrogen poultry litter, that would have been 600 pounds of nitrogen total applied. Now, the reason this worked this way is because not all of that nitrogen was available, as everybody knows. But still, that's a tremendous amount of nitrogen that's put into the system to achieve those yields. Using a pelletized poultry litter fertilizer in that same study, it was a 423, yields topped out with about 200 to 250 pounds an acre of N. So in that instance, you see that the pelletized litter fertilizer was much more available, most likely, compared to the poultry litter, because you were able to achieve high yields at around a third the rate. This was all applied pre-plant. And so many growers have taken to saying, all right, I'm going to assume approximately 50% of my organic fertility is available during the season, so I'm going to double up what I need. And I understand that. However, there's some additional research showing that depending upon the type that you use, that may not be necessary. One thing that really got us looking at organic nitrogen fertilizer sources and organic nitrogen in onions was it was a sampling that was done by Hunt Sanders, who used to work for UGA. Now he works for Valent Chemical. And he was working for Valent at the time and working on some products, and happened to pull some samples from both organic growers and conventional growers. And these foliar samples were taken in late March, so pretty late in the season, right before, tops down, a couple weeks or so. And what was interesting was that he saw that the organic onions had a considerable greater amount of nitrogen in the foliage than the conventional ones. And we were kind of surprised. We're like, in these organic systems, nitrogen's not supposed to be as available. But then we got thinking, all right, well, in a conventional system, you put out your late application of calcium nitrate, maybe late February, early March, and then that's it for the most part. But in these organic systems, these slower releasing fertilizers are continuing to mineralize nitrogen throughout the season. And so in a conventional system, you dial back your nitrogen fertility late in the season. Your nitrogen level in the foliage kind of drops off a little bit as it goes into the bulb, and that's what we want. But in the organic system, because those fertilizer sources, the poultry litter, is still releasing nitrogen, and in fact, at that time of year, as it's getting hotter, they're releasing more and more nitrogen. We see these very high levels of nitrogen in the foliage of our organic onions late in the season. And this is not desirable. Obviously, late applications of nitrogen, we've seen in the past, particularly ammonium base, can increase disease levels and off flavors in bulbs. Bacterial diseases have been shown to be increased with high nitrogen late. So how can we manage organic fertilizers better so that we're not getting this huge shot of fertilizer late in the season, but yet we're still meeting the needs of that plant? This is actually some additional data. This was taken by Hannah De Jesus. She's a PhD student. And what she was looking at was optimizing nitrogen applications and looking at sour skin and center rot. She also was looking at drip irrigation. She found that overhead irrigation, in this instance, had a little bit more disease. N rate wasn't significant in terms of affecting it. But what I wanted to show everybody is that when nitrogen was applied late, after bulb swelling, she had a significant increase in center rot disease in those bulbs. And so again, this just reinforces that idea that you want to avoid late applications of nitrogen. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the research that's been done in onions and in other crops, looking at organic fertilizer release rates. And so when we look at organic fertilizers, unlike conventional fertilizers, there's a lot of things that affect how it's available and how it's released to the plant. So I pulled this graphic from ICL Fertilizers, and I thought it was nice because it was fairly straightforward and simple in the sense that you see here on the top of it says fertilizer inputs. You have organics, urea, ammonium, and nitrate. Well, the ammonium and the nitrate, you see those arrows that go across the screen, and they go right into the plant, right? So that's put out in the field, it's immediately available. But those organics, they go into the same, this little bubble that says soil organic matter, and then there's some arrows that look at, say, soil microbiology, right? And so it's a microbial-based process by which these become available to the plant, where they're converted into ammonium and then nitrate, which is available. And so if you think about it that way, all of the things in the soil that can affect that are going to impact organic fertilizer release rates. So you have soil type, whether you're a sandy soil or clay soil, and in particular, how much organic matter is in your soil. I'll show some data in a minute about that. You also have your management history. This ties in with soil type and organic matter, but have you put cover crops out there? Have you put legume cover crops out there? If you have a lot of legume cover crops and a lot of organic matter in the soil, you're going to have a lot of nitrogen available without even adding your fertilizer. Of course, temperature and timing makes a big impact. We know that in the winter, soils are cooler, microbial activity is less. So things are going to act a little bit slower in midwinter, maybe that February window versus that April window. And then, of course, the source, which we will talk about, depending on if it's a feather meal based, a blood meal based, a pelleted poultry litter, or non-composted poultry litter. That source does affect availability. So this is some information that Kate Cassidy Duffy, she's a PhD graduate from the University of Georgia several years ago. She looked at nitrogen mineralization with a range of different organic fertilizers in different settings. But this slide here, which is all of her data, it shows plant available nitrogen across different soils. And so this is just latent available nitrogen mineralized from different soils. And so starting at day 0, that was her 0 point. But you can see she looked at sisal soils, which are mostly clay, like a clay loam or a sisal clay, sandy loam or something like that, a Greenville soil, and then a Tifton soil, which is obviously mostly sand. You can see the big difference in that bottom chart. The sisal soils are around 3% organic matter. The Greenville has about 1.9, and then the Tifton has 1% organic matter. Of course, in South Georgia, our soils, near Reedsville are a little bit pebbly, but they're similar in structure to a TIF soil. Generally, we're a little bit less than that in terms of organic matter. But what I really want to show is how those different soils impact available nitrogen. Now, this is just latent nitrogen that's mineralized out of organic matter in the soil. And you can see that those sisal soils that are high organic matter mineralized over 100 pounds of nitrogen that was just latent in that organic matter, okay? Now, that Tifton soil, very low organic matter, sandy soil, had far, far less than that. So you're looking at, in this case, 14 pounds of nitrogen mineralized after 100 days. And that's a direct result of that low organic matter soil in that sandy soil structure. And so if you are managing organic onions and you've managed to increase your organic matter, and maybe you're on a little bit heavier dirt in East Georgia, you're going to have more nitrogen that's going to be in that organic matter available to your crop that you don't even necessarily have to apply. Likewise, if you're on a very sandy soil with very little organic matter, there's going to be virtually nothing there. There's also differences in mineralization among organic fertilizers. So this is additional work that Kate did. And what she found was that the available nitrogen 100 days after application varied from 20 to 85%, depending upon the type of fertilizer. So this goes back to some of that early work that Dr. Boyhan did, where he looked at a poultry litter direct versus a pelletized poultry mix, where the pelletized seemed to be a little bit more available. And in this slide, this is her data. We see that the bone meal, which is no surprise, was not very available. But what's interesting is that pelleted poultry litter, which is that green triangle, was about about 25, 28% available by the end of that 100 days. The pelleted poultry mix, which would be based on usually litter, but with other things, other byproducts in there, looked to be about 50% mineralized. Blood meal and the feather meal base, which is a very common fertilizer, that was closer to 70% mineralized. And then also you can see the rate of mineralization. For the pelleted poultry, the feather meal based and the blood meal, you can see that a large majority of that is released within 25, 30 days after application, where some of those other ones take considerably longer. And so that is really important. If you're putting this mix out for some of these products, maybe 3 weeks before planting, a whole lot of that is available right at planting, and maybe that's just going to be leached away. And so again, this could affect how much you're putting out when you're applying that. Now, organic fertilizers, because they generally need to be incorporated, often are put out prior to planting or immediately prior to planting, but maybe you don't want to go out 3-4 weeks before planting, because by the looks of this, after a month, a large part of that fertilizer is readily available. Soil type and the history of that soil, as I said before, also make an impact. This is a study that was done by a graduate student of mine, Savannah Lahr, where she looked at nitrogen mineralization from a long-term, heavily amended organic soil. These were in high tunnels that were high organic matter, greater than 4%. It was a Cecil sandy loam base soil, but like I said, it had a lot of organic matter. And this is without any fertilizer being added. Over 6 weeks, she found that over 100 pounds of nitrogen an acre were mineralized from those soils. Again, if you're on those sandy tipped soils, you're not going to see this level of fertility of mineralization. But maybe if you're on a heavier dirt that's been managed organically long term, you're going to have this to complement the fertilizer that you're adding to those soils. So this brings us to some current studies where we've been looking at 2 different types of pelletized organic fertilizer products. One is a 1028 from NatureSafe. It's a feather meal based product, a little bit faster release, as you can see from that prior chart. And then also a 543 Harmony, which is more of a poultry litter based product. It's also pelletized, slower release, and looking at 100 up to 300 pounds an acre of nitrogen. Now we calculated that assuming 100% mineralization. So it's not like we really put out enough for 900 pounds of an acre, assuming 30%. This is enough for 300 pounds. We put it out pre-plant. We conducted this both in Tifton and up in Watkinsville. You can see that picture, that's from Watkinsville. It's kind of a heavier soil there. We did have some stand loss last year with some cold weather that came in. And of course, you can see the some of the weeds in there. We cultivated that with finger weeders. So this is some more data from Hannah. This is from the Tifton trial. I thought it would be a little bit more applicable to the growers in this audience. But this is the 543. This is the litter-based Harmony product. And we see that pretty much consistent increase in yield. There's some variability there. But you see, 250, 300 pounds, the trend line is that it keeps increasing. And that's kind of similar to what Dr. Boyhan found with that poultry litter, kind of a linear increase. And so this is 300 pounds of total potential N. Now, far less than that actually mineralized. And you can see the yield was fairly low. With this, it was only about 440-pound bags an acre. The variety that we used in the study tended to be an early maturing variety and stayed fairly small. But you see that linear increase with that 543 product. However, this is the 1028. This is the feather meal nature safe product. You see that it plateaus. Really, on the graph, it was around 170, 180 pounds an acre. It's 173 is where they kind of saw the max in terms of yield. Again, similar yield in terms of total yield at our max as the Harmony. They were, around 300. We hit about 350, 400. Still a lower yield overall compared to conventional growers, but you can see kind of plateaus. So this suggests that this feather meal based product that's typically more readily available, we can use much lower rates of that because it is much more available to those crops and maybe more quickly available, and that we can significantly dial back what we're putting out. We're at 150 to let's say 170 pounds of N. So that's what, 1,700 pounds of this product per acre versus putting out a 4% product at 200 or 300 pounds, which is, several, it's more than a ton an acre. And so depending upon the product you pick in terms of how available it is, you can greatly cut back on your nitrogen rate. Now, we're going to be looking further at how much of that nitrogen is available late in the season, because what our hypothesis is that the 1028 would be available earlier, it's more readily available, and it wouldn't be supplying nitrogen late and causing some of those issues. But we're going to continue to look at that. Okay, onion yields maximized at 187 pounds. So generally you saw the feather meal based product releases quicker than the litter based product, which we kind of suspected. Those onions getting that seem to grow a little bit better earlier in the season, meaning that January, February window, and jumped out of the ground when it was time to grow. Trials in Watkinsville had similar trends. By and large, they were very similar, but poorer yields overall. And I contribute this kind of the colder weather we had up here. We had some of the same onions on some black plastic mulch planted on the farm, and they did considerably better, likely due to the heat. But again, and also looking at some of the N levels, some of what we harvested up in Watkinsville had lower N levels than some of that previous grower work. And so we're going to continue to look at this, but I did want to just give an update to the group that really looking at your nitrogen source, if you're an organic grower, understand cost is a major factor, but you may be able to cut down significantly on what you're applying if you pick some of those more available sources. And again, unlike those conventional fertilizers, there's some vast differences in availability of these. And so with that, I'd like to give some thanks to Kate Cassidy Duffy, Hannah De Jesus, Savannah Lauer, and Andrea Silva, who helped provide data for this presentation. And with that, I will turn it over for live questions and answers. Thank you.